Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning if you're in New York. So there is something that I wanted to read to you guys for a very long time. When I say a long time, I'm talking about 3 weeks or 2 weeks. And it actually relates to what Ari Lewis, my friend Ari Lewis, spoke to our most recent guest. His name is Hanania Weissman, on the Ari Lewis show, and we spoke about the topic of you know what, and then we posted it on our channel on the video platform that is owned by the company that rhymes with the word bugle and frugal, and subsequently the video was taken down. And luckily there's another platform called Rumble. We posted on there. So what I want to read to you guys right now relates to not just the topic that we spoke about, but actually what really is going on in the Western world and in the States, and not only what's going on, but what we are probably going to see very, very soon. And it's a blog that's written by a man, or published by a man by the name of Dov Bar Leib. He's an American Jew who made Aliyah, I guess, at least 20 or 30 years ago. I consider him a Torah scholar, a big person, and I'm going to read to you guys from his blog. We can make what we want of this. And my friend, yes, and my friend is here, and I guess he didn't get my message, but it's okay. It's my fault. Anyway, so I'm just going to read to you guys. This is actually a very long blog post, and I'm not going to read to you guys the whole thing because it's very, very long. It's almost like I consider it even like maybe a book or like a pamphlet of sorts that would probably be about 50 pages were it to be a book. However, I'll read to you guys the second half of it, basically the last part of it, the second half of it. And you will pretty much get the idea of what he's talking about. So here goes. So he goes on to say, as I discussed in formative posts on this blog, America was founded on the morality of the Hebrew written scriptures, not on the morality of the New Testament. Meaning, if you guys look at the history of the founding fathers, they actually were looking into the Tanakh. They weren't looking so much into the New Testament, but into the, so guys, I'll straighten this out, into the Tanakh and the prophets, the books of the prophets and Tehillim. They actually considered even making, it's kind of crazy, Hebrew the official language of the new land. So, he continues, the morality, not on the morality of the New Testament, which really is not a text dealing with morality and decency, but a text dealing with how to get into the next world without worrying incessantly about morality and decency. He's talking about Christianity. America, as a majority Christian nation, still had its hang-up of not understanding that God truly takes into account our extenuating circumstances, meaning He knows what our tests are when He judges us so that we can be held accountable only with the free will choices that any particular situation gives us. If we need to steal in order to not die, we have a heter, a temporary permission to steal as long as a serious threat to our life exists. Meaning, if you're starving, right? It's actually kind of a crazy idea. Only for the three cardinal sins, murder, immorality, and idolatry, is there no heter to do those things in order to survive, to not die. There's no, permission. With a gun at our heads, one is permitted to steal by God Himself, with a gun to your head, if it is demanded at the point of a gun, but no one is permitted to murder. Yet on an everyday application of Noahide law, American common sense prevailed and usually allowed for these extenuating circumstances in courts of law, even if there was no heter in their minds, and you know about this allowance, to enter the world to come without Yoshke, J.C. Penney, paving the way. These allowances, of course, were only given to American citizens. For Native Americans and for slaves considered to be worth 3/5 of a human being, They were given no such favors of granting allowance based on extenuating circumstances in the courts of jurisprudence. And of course, when America went to war for most of its history until Vietnam, America knew how to win wars by not granting the enemy such considerations either. Sorry, I just don't want to lose it. America's greater flaw is basically Asaf's second flaw, that all good that is done must be done with a long-term motive of profit and prosperity. The purpose of serving God, even according to the values of Hebrew scriptures, is to achieve the American golden calf dream. This is according to American mentality. To retire comfortably with $1 million in savings. The converse, to make money to serve God, is great and altruistic. Such people can be lauded, but it is not intrinsically American to demand such altruism of its citizens, meaning that's not the goal. The goal is not to, what the Jews would tell you, which is to make money so you can serve Hashem, but to make money to, live comfortably, and serving Hashem is like kind of a side thing, right? In America, in American mentality. It is why America ostensibly fails 3,333 years after Sinai at the level of Chod. So now he's getting into Kabbalah. That is in Chod, the 33rd level of impurity. So you guys don't have to know a little bit of Kabbalah to understand what he's saying. Only nations that serve God altruistically can lead the world to the next level for its own sake. Only the nation with a Mashiach ben Yosef at Yesod, at the foundation, that is in Yesod, the 41st level of purity, or a Mashiach ben David at Malchut, that is in Malchut, 49th level of purity, can take mankind to the next level. And even with American visionaries and its founding fathers, America is not that nation. And neither is Australia, which right now, in 21, is likely the most moral, sane nation in the Western world. So the question might be asked. So he's a little bit all over the place, but he ties it all together. So the question might be asked after World War I, what did America do to clean up Asaf's murder and mayhem tendencies of the previous, at the time, almost 1,600 years of Christianity? He's talking about what Europe was doing to the Jewish people, right? And also Islam. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points to end, with fairness, the war that was supposed to end all wars, which we're talking about World War I. In almost every way, there was nothing magnanimous or particularly Christian about Wilson's 14 points. It is completely rooted in the secular thought with no God-centered overtones in the language of points. Christian civilization, technologically and economically light years ahead of the rest of humanity by the turn of the 20th century, had conquered the world but had not conquered Edom's intrinsic nature as a violent, bloodshedding, or bloodletting civilization. Interestingly enough, in the area of sexual immorality, Christianity did develop an aversion to homosexuality, adultery, bestiality, and incest, the four big do-nots of sexual immorality. No offense to anybody watching. This is not to say that no one in the West throughout history broke these commandments to Noach, commandments which were given to Noach from God, but as a civilization, for the most part, for 1,600 years, the above behaviors were shunned by the vast majority of Christians. Modesty in the Western world was also a premium value for most of that time. Anyone who has seen footage of American women at the beach in 1900, and actually Mizrahi talks about this, in 1900 in dresses down to their ankles, wading in the ocean, knows how far and how fast America fell in the 120 years between 1900 and 2020. And even while the men of Edom were bludgeoning and bleeding their perceived enemies over wars dealing with particulars of Christian faith, or mercantile shipping, or colonization of precious natural resources, whatever the reasons for the countless wars the Europeans fought over the centuries. As the inability of Christians to find Christian solutions to the problem of murder and bloodshed became obvious, it was inevitable that a person born to a Christian family, Christian American family, with a moral heritage somewhat rooted in the Bible, would find secular and progressive solutions to the subduing the bludgeoning nature of Malchut Edom, the kingdom of the West. The Bible would be necessary because the prophetic vision of world peace, as expressed by Yeshayahu, Micha, Malachi, and Zechariah, did produce fertile fruit in the minds of those who read their written text. If you guys go to the UN today, you'll see there's a park, and it says, that's where it says the famous things, and they should beat their swords into plowshares. I think it's Zechariah, if I'm not mistaken, did produce fertile. Okay. So an individual well-versed in the prophetic text would be required to come up with secular prescriptions to, at least in theory, achieve this vision while rejecting in principle, the Jewish path for achieving the utopian reality. The person of the West would likely be a nominal Christian with a flawed personal character, with grandiose dreams and an equally grandiose intellect. Such the man was President Woodrow Wilson. He was a devout segregationist who became president the first time in 1912 because his opposition included the Republican incumbent President William Howard Taft and the third-party candidate, former President Teddy Roosevelt, both of them together splitting the opposition vote. He won a second term in 1916, once again with the same Jim Crow Southern Democratic support he had in 1912, along with a solid blue Western vote including Rocky Mountain states, Plain states, and West Coast states. It is something of note that he won the presidency as a so-called progressive who never even once lost a Southern state in either election. He demonstrated his progressive credentials by mandating an 8 hours a day, 6-day work week, prohibiting child labor, extending antitrust legislation, proposing strict health and safety regulations for factory workers, and safeguarding female employees through legislation. Being a blue state back in 1916 had an entirely different meaning than it has today. Here was a man who believed in Jim Crow racial segregation who somehow became president of Princeton University and governor of New Jersey. And yet somehow became governor and president twice as a progressive. He campaigned for re-election in 1916 with a position that he was going to stay neutral in World War I by not entering the war. Look how that worked out. He previewed the viciously racist movie Birth of the Nation, famous racist movie, in the White House in a special White House screening in February 1915, saying, "It's like writing history with lightning. My only regret is that it is all so terribly true." The man was fatally flawed, yet people who rate presidents overlook his fatal flaws and rate him as one of the greatest American presidents. For our purposes, what is important to remember is here was the first American president with a burning desire for utopian perfection detailed by the prophets of Hebrew scripture who wanted to achieve that perfection through totally secular means, or in the language of the early 20th century, through progressive means. Ultimately, it was through progressives like Wilson that after the failure of the League of Nations from his 14 points to enforce world peace and brotherhood with the onset of World War II, the United Nations would be proposed in the ashes of World War II with the following passage from Yeshayahu, that's Yeshayahu, not Zechariah, engraved on the wall near its entrance, "They shall be the swords and the plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Just one second, guys. I want to see how much longer this goes on. I wanted to get to like a main, okay, fine. Just one second. I want to see if so I want to really get to the kind of the main point here. Okay. Because he's a little bit, the way that he writes is a little bit like stream of consciousness. Okay. Yeah, this is fine. Okay. Okay, fine. When this wall called the Ralph Bunche Wall was dedicated in 1948, the original sculptors did not even give credit to the prophet Isaiah. It was rededicated in 1975 with the author's name, Isaiah, added as an afterthought. And God and his moral structure for the universe was completely left out of the picture by omission, simply not including the whole quote from Isaiah. "And it shall come to pass in the end of days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it." You know, this kind of, I notice what they do. It's the same thing when people talk about, they mention the psukim, what are the psukim? Oh yeah, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. You know, a lot of these lefty Jewish organizations like to say, you know, justice, justice, you shall pursue, right? You guys, you know what the line is? The next line of that pasuk. If these lefty Jews would say the next line, it's just funny that they use it, right? So it says, "Justice, justice, you shall pursue," and then it goes on to say, here you go. One second, Shoftim. It basically talks about here that you may live and inherit the land which your Lord God gives you. So that part they leave out. They leave out the part that talks about Eretz Israel. You know, these lefty organizations who want us to give away our whole land or half our land, they leave out that part. They say justice you shall pursue, But the part about literally the next line, you shall dwell in your land, they leave it out. Just like these guys left out the most important things. Okay, fine. And many people shall go and say, come ye and let us go up to the mount of the Lord and the house of God of Jacob. He will teach us of his ways, he will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth Kimiti and Teitzei Torah, Dvar Shem Yerushalayim. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. It goes on. He and God shall judge between the nations, shall decide for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning. That's the end of it, right? Now you tell me, when the UN or previous, this is where he goes, to that, when Woodrow Wilson's idea for a League of Nations takes the end of the verse 4 out of the context, verse 4 out of the context, by not including all the verses 2 through 4, what type of institution for world peace are they trying to set up? This is where it gets to the brunt of what we're talking about here, right? Is it promoting one without God as the governing authority for mankind, an international organization that decides on its own moral code for good and evil, which promotes its own secular incentives against decent human beings in order to achieve world government devoid of divine authority on our lives? It attempts to end the cycles of bloodshed throughout the entire history of Edom by including biblical platitudes for world peace without obligating human beings to obedience to God's laws in order to achieve it. It's like we're just talking about these wonderful ideas, but our behavior does not coincide with these things, right? Let's forget about mitzvot for a second even. That is Woodrow Wilson's intent in a nutshell. He found the secular Western solution for all of Esav's wars and wanton violence for the previous millennia expressed by biblical platitudes for world peace without acceptance of God's moral authority. Okay, so in 1918, Asa found the key to end his perpetually violent ways, but unleashed himself from his obedience to God's other commandments, which are supposed to be part and parcel of achieving the ultimate goal. As my mother would say, half-ass. Oops. What's up, guys? Okay. So when Edom finally found the key to world peace, he unleashed this path to destruction by sexual immorality in stages. 1/3 of his devotees fell into degeneracy between 1918 and 1967. We know that, with the flappers and all this kind of stuff. 1/3, the middle third of the bulk of his devotees fell into degeneracy between 1967 and 2016, the hippie movement and onward. By the end of 98 years, 2/3 of the population in Western civilization had fallen below Mem Tet Sharituma, below the 49th level of impurity. In the first 49 years, it was difficult to perceive because only the leftist third of the population fell through the abyss over the course of those 49 years. 2/3 of at least of American civilization remained relatively spiritually wholesome during the first 49-year deterioration between 1918 and 1967. Those who engaged in wild orgies in the Roaring '20s, I mentioned the flappers, did so behind ivy-covered walls, often surrounding ivy-covered mansions. If you guys read the book Gary Gatsby, there you go. They did so to isolate themselves from 2/3 of American culture that would, at the time in the 20s, still reject their wild behaviors. Yes, we saw those dress lengths from before World War I at the beach go from down to the ankles to Betty Grable swimsuits in the 40s and 50s. So the culture was negatively affected in its mores because of the degeneracy of the Roaring '20s. But only the far leftist third fell through the floor all the way until 1967. But the summer of promiscuity, or summer of love, on the lawn of Golden Gate, 50th Gate Park in San Francisco, changed all that. With the summer of promiscuity in the summer of '67, which began in the very same week as the Six-Day War, by the way, when the portal opened up, when Yerushalayim was taken back, the middle third of the culture of Western civilization, over the course of the next 49 years, fell through the floor of the 49th level of impurity by the summer of 2016. Right before we know who, Man Bad, Orange Man Bad, was elected. The last straw was this 26th of June 2015, when the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, forced certain marriage contracts in all 50 states, even the states that were repulsed by such contracts. 3 of the 5 justices in the majority were the Erev Rav leftist Jews. You're talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a couple other people. As luck would have it, in a quirk of fate, the Triple Crown winner in horse racing from 3 weeks earlier at the Belmont Stakes was named American Pharaoh, signifying America's fall until the 49th level of impurity, up until that Supreme Court decision in 2015. It was from that point that the formerly exceptional country known as the United States would lose its majority in support of basic human sanctity, with the Pulse nightclub terrorist attack in Orlando Florida, taking place 1 year later in June. I mentioned this, by the way, 2016, in which the 49, homosexuals were murdered by Omar Mateen from Memtet to Noon, from 49 to 50, between June 2015 and June 2016. By the way, guys, just to add one thing, Omar Mateen, and this happened right before Shavuot, which is Omer Matan, like you finish counting the Omer and then Matan Torah, Omar Mateen, Omer Matan. Between 2015 and June 2016, America and the West in general fell into 2/3 reprobate status. 2/3 of its citizens became spiritual reprobates, alive in Olam Hazeh, but not in the world to come. Alive in the physical world, but basically gone in the world to come. Number 2. So this is point number 2. It took 98 years, but in the summer of 2016, Malchut Edom reached the second condition conceptually described by our prophets and sages to tell us that we are truly at the end of Olam Hazeh, from Zechariah Psukim. It shall come to pass that in the earth, said the Lord, 2 parts out of 3 therein shall be cut off and die, but the final third shall be left therein. And I will bring this final third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined. I will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, it is my people. They should say, Lord is my God. This is important to know, because this is the most important condition. The Mashiach must come, or else God is not going to allow his world to be spiritually polluted any further than this condition for the 2/3 reprobate set down in Zechariah 13. The final concept that must be integrated into this picture to understand the very end comes from the last week's parsha, Shlach Lecha. So he's writing 2 weeks ago, so it was the previous week's parsha of when he's writing this. When the spies were sent to spy out the land for their own benefit, something that turned out to be the biggest tragedy in all of Jewish history, blunder. This is what it says in Bamidbar. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rechab at the entrance of Hamat. And they went up into the south and came out to Hebron. And Achiman, Shesai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were there. These are the giants. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Tzoan in Egypt. That last sentence in verse 22 is a real curiosity. It seems disconnected from the entire narrative of the journey of the spies when they spied out the land for 40 days. We are told a fact about Hebron when the spies arrived there, that Hebron was built 7 years before Tzoan was in Mitzrayim. Very curious. Rashi says that this verse shows that Hebron was 7 times greater in purity, physical bounty, and sanctity than Tzoan in Egypt was in impurity, physical bounty, and debauchery. That is a nice shot, like simple level explanation, but is missing some depth. The question immediately comes to mind, why is this distinction in greatness expressed in years? After years of thought about this, I would like to introduce a new idea, a Hiddush. We're being told in the Torah about 2 polar opposites, both created almost at the same time. Tzoan was there where the pharaohs of the old kingdom sat in Mitzrayim. We can argue the point of the pharaohs of the Exodus were from the old kingdom or not, but there's a lot of evidence that Yosef was the great Imhotep, the vizier of Djoser, who guided that pharaoh through the pitfalls of a 7-year famine, and who lived until the ripe old age of 110. Of course, Egyptologists say that Djoser ruled according to their calculations 900 years before Seder Olam, which is like the order, our calendar, dating for the Exodus, but perhaps they are simply dead wrong. Assuming the possibility that Moshe and Aaron performed the 10 plagues before the pharaoh from the old kingdom in this city called Tzoan, Tanis in Greek, which was an actual capital of ancient Egypt during the 21st and 22nd dynasties of the New Kingdom, then it was specifically in Tzoan that Israel had to be redeemed in the last instance before falling before the 49th level of impurity. I'm going to skip some things, guys. Okay. I'm going to explain to you guys a concept. There's two. When people talk about Mashiach, they talk about 2 ways Mashiach can come. It's called, I think it's Be'ita and Be'achishena. So I'm going to explain to you guys what Be'ita means. I think Be'ita means, just one second. I think it means in its time. No, Be'ita means, yes, he says if they merit, I will hasten it. If they don't merit, in its time. So, I think, yeah. I think Be'ita means, just One sec, guys. One of these, I always mix them up. Yeah, there's a song called Be'ita and Ahishena. Be'ita Ahishena. So, so one sec, guys. Okay. Well, let's read this and we'll figure this out. Okay. At the end of days, when Mashiach comes Be'ita, if it is to be Be'ita, Mashiach shall come Be'ita Ahishena 7 years before. Oh, so basically in its time, right? Before 2/3 of mankind falls into the spiritual garbage dump. We would be given a test during the Shemitah cycle leading up to the 7th year beforehand. So guys, right now, I mentioned this before, right now we're basically at the end of the Shemitah cycle right now. In about 2 months, we're going to come up to the Shemitah year, 5782. We will be given a test during the Shemitah cycle leading up. Okay. So right now we're in that test. If we had passed the test, Mashiach could have come by passing a basic test in human decency 7 years before 2/3 of mankind reached the quicksand below 49th level of Tumah. This is the case because the world as a whole, Be'ita can never be more than 6 years out of spiritual balance, even on the side of positivity and purity. Purity can never be more than 6 years out of balance with complete spiritual impurity. So it is no accident that the 7-year cycle, ending 7 years before the summer of 2016, was the Gog, he just calls it Gog W. Bush Jr., son of Gog Bush Sr., Shemitah cycle from 5762 until 5769. So he's talking about like the years of Bush. That is from Hoshana Rabbah to the Motzei Shemitah year, 5762, until Hoshana Rabbah of the Motzei Shemitah year, 5769. In the middle of that cycle, in 5765, came the test of basic human decency, which we failed, called the evacuation of Gush Katif, whose failure we have recounted countless times in this blog. Frankly, I do not want to review the epic failure. It's interesting, we're talking about this in the 3 weeks. At this time, from the 15 years ago, except to say that this is the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. In this 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, the chickens or consequences of that evacuation have finally come home to roost. We're talking about, we have the wars. See, it says, it is at this point where a Kal Vachomer, also this, even more so, maybe the most important, even more so for this final redemption. If the world cannot be out of balance, even on the side of positivity and goodness more than 6 years, Be'ita Hishena, even the more so, on the side of negativity and Tumah, the world cannot be out of balance more than 6 years. In short, since the redemption did not come by the end of the George W., or he calls it Gog W. Bush Jr., Shemitah cycle in 5769, because of our outlandish behavior in 5765, so he's talking about like basically it didn't come in 2009, so because of the stupidity that we did with Gush Katif, 2/3 of humanity fell off the spiritual cliff by the summer of 5776. Guys, I think it's interesting that, people are all upset about Trump, or at Trump, when they found videos of him saying, grabbing this and grabbing that, to the point where women came out, ironically, against him with hats that were representing the body part that he was talking about. Even though their favorite President Clinton actually did the stuff instead of just talking about it. Okay. Over and over again. With many different women. Okay. So for the last 6 years, starting in the summer of 5775, when we were at the 49th level of impurity, about to fall off a cliff, the entire world, or all of humanity, is in a severe spiritual deficit. This is where he gets to it. The last 6 years, the entire world is like a spiritual Mad Max movie. The first 6 years of a truly dystopian Shmittah cycle, my friends. Just look around you. I don't have to get into it. It is in the 7th year of this degenerate cycle that through divine justice, God himself brings the entire world back into balance, not just by the balancing off the 7th year with equal purity against the forces of darkness that have characterized the last 6 years. So basically we're saying, he says, but through divine justice, the forces of purity must be at least 6-fold greater than the deficit for each of the previous 6 years. In short, in the Shemitah year 5782, purity must come roaring back sixfold to counter the deficit for the last 6 years, plus an additional measure to counter the deficit between evil and good in the Shemitah year itself. That is the sevenfold magnification in purity over impurity that Rashi was talking about. So guys, you can see right now, even we're seeing a lot of things coming out in the media about you know what, and the emails that were leaked. And we're seeing truth coming out. We're seeing all these things. We're seeing, like, you know, even the lefty media cannot deny certain things. And little, you know, even incrementally stuff's coming out. This thing causes this side effect. This thing causes this. People are denying it. First we're saying it's minority. First we're saying it's not, you know, let's not jump to conclusions. Then we're saying, oh, it's a minority of people. Now we're putting, you know, warning labels on these things. And soon we're gonna see all the truth. We're gonna get to a point where, you know, the Shmoogle video platform is not going to be able to ban certain videos that, you know, people like myself are posting and other people. Okay? Okay. That Be'ita will be the nature of divine judgment in this coming Shemitah year. And we're only 2 months away, guys, by the way. Rosh Hashanah is coming beginning of September. And you're talking about basically end of September. That's Hoshana Rabbah. That's the end of, you know, Simchat Torah. That's it. And we'll see what happens end of September, the beginning of October. Be the nature of divine judgment in this coming Shemitah year against the nations that seek our destruction. At this stage of degeneracy of mankind, it is almost impossible to expect a rectification for Mashiach to come in another way, still praying for Ahishana every day, meaning if we merit it. To be honest, there are several more concepts that need to be discussed, such as the bending of the, I don't know what this means, the last of the tzadi to feed and Manspach, I don't know what this is, something Kabbalah related in the last 1 year and 9 months of the Shemitah cycle, starting from when Jonathan Pollard, Mashiach ben Ephraim, landed in Zion on the 15th of Tevet, 5781, but it's getting very late. Hint, it is Mashiach ben Ephraim ben Yosef who puts the ben tzaddik in the word Zion by adding the concept of tzaddik to Yavan, to Yawan, to Greece, I don't know. This explains why our judgment here in Israel during the 6th year had to begin in the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood with the eviction of those 4 Arab squatter families. By the way, guys, you probably saw, we interviewed, for those who missed it, the only English-speaking Jew to live in that neighborhood, Yaakov Falchi, who they turned into an international, you know, I guess you could say notorious person, who welcomed Alexander the Great to Yerushalayim, who in actuality added the tzaddik to Yavan, the tzaddik to Greece. It is extremely important that in the 7th year, Israel not be judged harshly in the same heshbon, in the same account as the Umot HaOlam will be held in account. Basically what he's saying is that Israel is not going to be judged in the same way that the nations will be. Lower. Our suffering here must be intense in the 6th year so that we will not be figured in with the nations of the world in the 7th year, my friends. There is an economist, his name is Michael Burry. He was the person who basically predicted, you know, the movie The Big Short with Christian Bale is based on him. He predicted the last collapse. He's been talking about this autumn something is about to happen with the securities markets. I don't even want to say. So the judgment of the last trimester of the 9 months in the 6th year will seem very acute and intense here in Eretz Israel, so that the 6th, right now what we're experiencing here in Israel, right, for the past year, crazy stuff, crazier than in America, but so that the 7th year, hopefully beginning during Sukkot, will not lead to our destruction. That's why I want to be here in Sukkot. Okay. And just like it says in Yeshayahu, the entire year of 5782 will be a year of recompense for the cause of Tzion. So it'll be like, in our name, in the name of Israel and Jewish people, the nations who did some stuff to us, or certain people, will have to settle the account. And this very long post needs to be temporarily ended at this point to be continued at a later date. I'm publishing it now, Dov Bar Leib. Here, he just added some comments here. I just want to mention anything relevant. A lot of people added their stuff in. 1 second. What else did he say? One second. Something significant that he wrote. Guys, by the way, I just wanted to mention, I don't know if this is a fact. I don't know if this is true. I'm not going to speculate. I have a lot of friends, like, Jonathan Pollard gave 2 speeches since he's returned to Israel. One at Yom Yerushalayim, at Merkaz Rav Yeshiva and one at the Sovereignty Conference in Gush Etzion. I have a lot of people who just messaging me. They're like, "Do you think Jonathan Pollard is Mashiach ben Yosef?" And I'm just kind of like, "Dude, like, whoa, I don't know. Let's relax here, you know." But it's interesting. It's interesting that all these things are happening right now. See, it says, I would like to say that former Vice President Mike Pence had all 5 letters to Manspach in his name. The 4 letters most associated with the previous shepherds of Israel are already bent so that America could somehow accompany us through those years, representing those shepherds associated with those years of this dystopian Shmittah cycle, where 2/3 of mankind had already fallen below the 49th level in the year between summer 2015 and summer 2016. So for the first 5 years and 3 months of this final Shmittah cycle, we were spared the chaos that is ultimately necessary to bring Mashiach. But even the good in Edom believes in a different Mashiach, right? They believe in Mr. J.C. Penney. So the tzadi in Pence's name is not bent, for it was not part of the divine plan for even the best of Esav's nations to accompany us, while the tzadi is being bent to bring judgment in the world in advance of Mashiach ben David. I never understood Rav Kessen's insistence, Tzadi mentions Rav Kessen, that Trump will be with us to the end, since for the Beni and Tzaddik we only have God on our side. America was not destined to remain intact, to abandon J.C. Penney for the real Mashiach. It was never made sense that someone like the former vice president would agree to those terms, as kind and decent as he was. He and most of 50 million fundamentalist Christians who voted for Trump would never agree to those terms. So when Jonathan Pollard arrived in Israel, 1 week later, on January 6th, wow, VP Pence so he arrived beginning of January, handed Trump's scepter over to the forces of darkness. It was time to bend the tzadi, and the special relationship with America ended. So he's saying that basically it's done. This guy's saying, the special relationship between Israel and America is essentially over. Well, I mean, we can see that now. We see there's a power struggle here in Israel. There's also, the people that they have over there in the administration that's, in the States. So guys, as I said in a previous video at the Kotel, in about a couple of months, we should see something very interesting. We should see something interesting now. We are seeing it. But basically, probably beginning with Sukkot. Sukkot is... like middle of September, end of September. Guys, it's around the corner. Really, you're going to wake up and it's going to be Sukkot and Simchat Torah. It's going to be very interesting, guys. Very, very interesting. With that said, check out my video from last night that I posted entitled Think Outside the Blocks. Should be interesting for you, also connected to what I just read to you guys and spoke about. And I'll also post a video on Rumble of our interview yesterday with what's his name, with Hanania Weissman, which was taken down by BlueTube, or Schmoogle, or Bugle. And listen, we're just going to keep going here. We have no other choice. And things are about to get very exciting. Hold on to your hats. All right, guys. Talk to you soon.